Asia's top restaurants, the table is number one in India.
Casual fine dining restaurant serving a San Francisco inspired menu, the table is one of the swankiest addresses in Mumbai.
This is the craziest thing ever. I know nothing about this. All of it stemmed from something that we felt we wished was there in the city and didn't exist. As a restaurant that's been around 15 years, I don't think there's anything like loyalty. The minute the product sort of quality or innovation drops, people are going to stop coming. It was a great lesson in sort of psychology for me. I used to go out to like parties and people used to like grab me whom I didn't even know and be like, "You're Gauri from the table, right? Why did you take this off?" In a weird way, it was a backhanded compliment because they felt some sense of ownership of this restaurant that led to us being number one in the country.
Yeah. This space is also bringing a lot of celebrity first restaurants like Shilpa Shetty and Malaika Arora or Gauri Khan and Karan Johar.
I think that there's a huge draw, obviously, that celebrities have. I think that it's a great marketing tool. But again, once people come in to bring them back in, the product has to work. They're not going to keep coming because it's associated with a celebrity. People are very opinionated today, but you have to be very strong about your own convictions so that you're not being swayed every 5 minutes trying to please everybody. The only thing that works is word of mouth. I will bet my bottom dollar on this that, nothing works like word of mouth. I think in this industry, we're eternal optimists. We do everything in hope. You're just like, "Acha, I'll give it one more month." You have to know when to cut your losses.
What does it take to be the best? My guest today is Gauri Devidayal, co-founder and director of Food Matters Group and one of the most influential names in India's modern restaurant industry. She began her career at PwC in London as a chartered accountant. In 2010, she took a year off to help her then future husband open one restaurant in Colaba, The Table. And last year, The Table was named the number one restaurant in India at the Condé Nast Traveler Awards and Zomato Awards. In this conversation, we decode the journey behind building a restaurant business, the success, the failures, the passion and the exhaustion, and everything in between. So thank you, Gauri. Thank you for coming to my show. I think I was really waiting to have this time with you.
Thank you for having me.
And so we start with congratulations that, in the Asia's top restaurants, you guys have moved like The Table and Food Matter is now, you guys are in 73. Overall, The Table is number one in India. I think amazing, and when I was reading about you and your journey, and that's where I would like to start, Gauri, that, and then you have spoken about it, being a tax consultant, working in Big Four, coming to India, and out of nowhere, it's a restaurant. And you were also married. I mean, imagine having a marriage and, starting a business which you are strangers to, both of you and your husband. How did that world look like back then?
So, everything you're saying takes me back to about 17 years ago when I think my family had a similar intervention saying that, so basically by way of background, I read law at university and then went into tax and sort of chartered accountancy. I qualified as a CA in the UK. And worked there for about 5 years, moved back when I'd had enough of the horrible British weather. Moved back home and, continued working with the same Big Four. I just transferred to the Bombay office. And it was a very different experience. But I got into it and sort of it was nice to be back home. And around that time is when I met my now husband, who had also just moved back from California. He, was in some tech-related business in San Francisco. He just sold his business and decided that he didn't want to do that anymore. And was I guess, going through a midlife crisis where he decided that he wanted to open a restaurant, as do, I think, most men in their sort of mid-40s. I was just like, this is the craziest thing ever. Like, you know nothing about this. I know nothing about this. I am very happy doing my job. Like, this is crazy. And, but, I was sort of happily working and he actually started pursuing this idea and, started looking at real estate, started talking to, chefs, friends. And And before I knew it, he was about to sign a lease. And I said, look, okay, like if this is really happening, let me just sort of go through all the paperwork, make sure everything's in order. That's the least I can do, that at least I can contribute that way. Eventually, when it got closer to opening the restaurant, I was getting more and more involved. And finally the restaurant opened, and I felt like I had sort of 2 full-time jobs, and, it was unmanageable. So I said, look, I'm going to take a year off from work and, help out on this. And worst case scenario, I know I can
Always
go back to that.
Yeah.
I'm an auditor at the end of the day, so I'm very risk averse. So I had a backup plan. And I think, for Jay, it was, it was a second sort of coming for him in a way. And he had put a little sort of kitty aside to, risk on this adventure. And, he was confident that it wouldn't affect his lifestyle if things went belly up. So it gave him that confidence. To take that plunge, right? So, and I think that really helped us in what we were going on to do, because we didn't feel like we had so much to lose. I guess that 1 year sabbatical ended up being 15 years now.
But where does this whole idea of tables from the farm to fork kind of insight come in? And I know you have a community table and things like that. But where did that?
So, as I mentioned, Jay had moved back from San Francisco. And so he, which is considered one of the sort of top cities for food.
Right.
And
I love the city.
Yeah. And, he'd lived there 16 years, came back to Bombay in 2008, which was a very different city from what it is today in terms of, F&B offerings.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think both of us love food. We both really sort of enjoy trying new things. We travel for food. And, we used to go out a lot, and it ended up being to the same few handful of places. So there was a gap, there was a need for something new in the city.
Right.
And we went into it very much with the idea of creating something that we would want to go to,
Nice.
without knowing whether there'd be others like us, or not. I mean, even what ended up happening was a sort of evolution of ideas and circumstances. But all of it stemmed from something that we felt we wished was there in the city and didn't exist.
So that's your mechanism or the framework, that what you believe is not there, and what you both would have liked going to is what you all have launched.
Exactly. We're very much, clear that we're in the premium category of whatever we do. So even if it's an Indian...
That you were clear about.
Yeah, I think because, again, it's what we gravitate towards and what we feel is true to ourselves. If you ask me to do, and there are immensely successful, value-driven QSR brands, right?
Right.
If you ask me to do that, I don't know how to do that, because I'm not a consumer for that product.
Right.
I guess, coming from a non-F&B background, it had to be something that resonated with us,
Right.
for us to take that plunge.
Right,
So, I mean, right or wrong, that's how we've, always approached everything we've done.
No, but amazing. 15 years of so much of intuitive and your gut, and what you resonate is what you want to present. Would you also tell somebody today who wants to start a restaurant, it's back then when you were younger and you had the gumption, would you do the same thing today also?
No, I think today it's a different landscape. It's a very crowded space. There are restaurants or brands or, sort of QSR concepts launching every week.
True.
In Bombay. Forget, what's happening around the country alone. And I would say that today, it's something that maybe needs a little bit more of a measured sort of approach, not as sort of crazy as what we did. At the time that we launched, there was no Instagram. There was a dearth of, restaurants in the space that we're in. And so I think we did have a timing advantage as well. I mean, of course, the product has to work.
Absolutely.
But it was a very different time and space, right? 15 years ago. So, today I would say test the market out. It's a very CapEx heavy business to get into.
Absolutely.
There's so many options out there that if you don't get it right on your first sort of time, then it's very hard to get people to come back in, because there's so many new things to try, right? So, and I still believe, like, even as a restaurant that's around 15, has been around 15 years, I don't think there's anything like loyalty I
I was
think
going to come to that.
it really, the product has to work,
the product
right?
has to work.
The minute the product sort of quality or innovation drops, people are going to sort of stop coming. We've seen that, and we've been through, a situation where we opened a restaurant and had to close it as well. So, I mean, I say this again that, go into it with, with confidence and doing your fair share of sort of testing the
Testing
market
the
before
market.
you
And today
launch.
you have Cloud Kitchen as an option to first test the market. Whether people, because you're right, because today more so the loyalty is not there in most of the things where people can switch, because it's available on Swiggy, Zomato, whatever you want, and
Yeah.
different things coming, so many Cloud Kitchen. So, but that's where I'm coming to the product now, Gauri. What you rightly said, that you have to get the product right. So, what is it that you have done at the table, or even at Max Street, or even in your the bakery, consistently, where you get people, because finally the businesses work if there is repeat customer. So, what is it that in the product that you all got it right?
Yeah, I mean, just talking about this idea of new customer, we're not in a New York, London, Paris, which has got tourist footfall every day of the week.
True.
We're in a city where that tourist season is maybe 3 months of the year, if that.
Right.
And the rest of the time, you're very much dependent on your local customer who needs to be a regular patron.
Yeah.
I believe that we've worked very hard on, firstly, innovation, but also setting that vision and standard that we had for ourselves with the rest of our team, so that there's no mindset of shortcuts or chalta hai, or but this will save us cost, so why are we not
Yeah.
doing this? So I
quality
think
first.
that idea that quality, we're a quality first product, is ingrained in every single member of our team.
Awesome.
Whether it comes to the food, whether it comes to the service, the hospitality experience, that is our biggest endeavor and what we spend a lot of our time doing. And I think that the reason we're still sort of going today is, of course, 15 years is a long time where chefs change, all of that does happen.
Right.
But finding the right talent is really important.
Yeah,
Recognizing when something is not right is equally important, and being able to pivot or, sort of make corrections and is really sort of integral to, and you have to have your finger on the pulse to do that,
need to
right?
have
It's
that.
not a business that runs on autopilot, at least in this premium segment. And I think that in the segment that we're in, people say, 15 years, you've only got 5 restaurants. And I'm okay with that. We're not on some sort of race to scale. I do feel that scale sometimes is counter sort of productive to being able to maintain high quality. I could be wrong, but that's my sort of experience.
And especially because you've invested, you have this place, people have to keep coming in. Talk about the menu. How often do you all have to, in a restaurant business, change?
It's a fine line
and
between.
how do you balance that?
Yeah, it's a fine line. You have to balance that need to fulfill cravings, because people come back for those same things.
Correct.
And as well as innovation, right? So I'll give you an example. About 2 years ago, 2.5 years ago or so, we brought on a new chef for the table. And, for any chef, they want to put their sort of stamp on the menu, right?
True.
They don't want to just be cooking what was being done in the past by another chef.
True.
And it meant that we changed pretty much sort of almost, I would say, 80% of our menu over a span of 6 months. Like, we gradually made these changes. The pushback we got from guests because, their favorite was off the menu was crazy. I did not expect that, because we, again, were very confident about what we were putting on the menu. We thought that it was way better than what was there before. We were evolving in the right way, and while staying true to what the restaurant's sort of cuisine orientation was. And it really, we went in as diners a few times, Jay and I, to test that, like, have we got it wrong? Like, why are we getting this pushback? And what we realized was, people are creatures of habit. So while they want innovation, they also want those cravings that they have. And, they come in, they know exactly, they don't even look at the menu half the time, and they rattle off their order. And, that's great, but you can't continue, you can't just stay stagnant either, right?
Yeah,
As a
you
restaurant,
can't,
which
correct.
is chef driven. If you're like I said, sort of, a McDonald's, for example, where people want that consistency, they're not looking for you to innovate every time. They'll go to
Yeah,
any
they're not looking for
country
experience
in
there.
the world, and they want that,
Same
Big Mac
burger.
or whatever. That's a different experience. This is something where when you're bringing in, a chef, and the idea is that it's a ingredient driven menu, ingredients change seasonally, that needs to
Right,
come in, right?
right.
So it was interesting because what we realized is it was just getting people to be open to trying something new. So they didn't not like the new menu. They were upset that their favorites had gone off. And it
Wow.
was just that, where, and I think marketing plays a big role in this, because not everyone's on Instagram and being aware that you've changed things. So you go to a restaurant thinking you're going to have something,
Same
and then it's
thing.
not there,
It's not
right?
there,
And it's more dealing with that emotion
Yeah,
than
wow,
the
yes.
idea of what you've actually put on the menu not being good. And so it took us about 6 months, and
So you had to bring back? What
no, we didn't. We stood our ground on this. And, there were people who were like very upset about certain things coming off. And we said, look, next time you're coming, tell us. If you really want that, we'll make it for you.
Okay.
But it was, I think, more, it was a great lesson in sort of psychology for me, because it was more
True.
letting them know that if they really wanted it, it was there. But then they were fine actually trying something new. It was just that thing of like, it
I was
was
not
bizarre,
aware.
honestly.
Yeah.
I used to go out to like parties, and people used to like grab me whom I didn't even know and be like, you're Gauri from the table, right? Why did you take this off? Why have you changed this? And I'd be like, who are you? And
Oh my God.
we're at a social gathering. Like, is this necessary? But I also, it wasn't something that I wanted to take offense to. It was, I really, in a weird way, it was a backhanded compliment in a
Yeah,
way, right?
absolutely.
Because they felt some sense of ownership of this
Ownership, yeah.
restaurant. And but obviously it paid off, because it led to us being number one in the country,
Yeah. Amazing.
in 14 years of after 14 years of opening. And that is not an easy thing
No, it's
to,
not easy.
it's not an award you can wing, or like you
yeah.
can't, there was no way that we could manipulate anything and rig the system. So it was a genuine validation and endorsement of the belief that we went in with when we changed it. And I think that is very, very important, because people are very opinionated today. And whether it's in the digital space, whether it's in person,
Yeah, you can immediately.
everybody has an opinion.
Yeah.
And that's fine, but you have to be very strong about your own convictions,
Yeah.
so that you're not being swayed every 5 minutes trying to please everybody. You kind of have that courage to stick to your stick your ground on what you envision for your brand is.
So, Gauri, tell me, a lot of premium restaurants also, and I'm talking about Bombay equally, they start, but they also have to completely do the makeover with the name. I've seen people starting, and in couple of years, maybe 4 or 5 years at max, and you will see the whole new name and the whole new setting in the same place. It's premium places also. So, and I do feel that the most underestimated thing in your restaurant business are your people behind, your chefs, because that's where finally your product is getting made, right? Your chef and managing attrition. So how have you guys over the years, I mean 15 years is long, still calling in the table, managing, and I'm sure the teams behind would have left. How have you managed this journey?
People say to me, you're in the F&B business. And I'm like, no, we're in the people business. F&B is just the output. Jay and I spend a lot of our time managing sort of people matters, because that is the crux of this business.
true.
That consistency comes when you have a consistent team. And I'm really proud to say our head chef at the table, who, supports our culinary director, he has been with us since pre-opening. So he's been
Wow,
with us
lovely.
15 plus years. And, our GM has been with us 10 plus years. And a lot of the senior members of our team have been with us since opening. And
So, what's the culture like at the in your company? Because what is it that you are doing differently that others must learn from you?
I don't know, honestly. I've not, I think I mean, culture is, of course, one big part of it is that there's transparency and respect and trust. When for the longest time, I mean, at least I think 3 or 4 years, it was only the table, right? There was no other business before
Correct.
we
Yeah.
started our bakery and Magazine Street Kitchen. So we were a very close-knit team. I mean, Jay and I were at the restaurant every single day. It's also a place where both of us are not, we're not sort of investors just sitting in the office. We are, in the restaurants.
Very
Now,
cool.
I would say less so because obviously they're more established. But in the beginning, the first 6 months, I was there every single night. And today, if I have to roll up my sleeves and help on, at a catering event, or I'm there. Like, I have no airs about sort of, running sort of service if I have to. And I think that the team respects that. They also,
because it's top down, you are equally involved.
Exactly. It's like, what do you need? I'm there for you. And I think that is something that, because of course our team members have been approached left, right, and center.
The attrition is high in your industry.
But I think people are also smart to recognize that you can jump somewhere for 5,000 rupees more or 10,000 rupees more. But they've also seen this not work for a lot of people, right? Where you get lured in with money and that's about it. And then, is the product there? Is the management solid? All these things matter.
They are empowered more in the...
I mean, yes, because there's no way we can do everything, right? Yeah. So you have to groom your team and then give them that freedom to do things, like give your floor manager the freedom to take decisions about, sending something to a guest or, what, if you don't do that, then, if you're going to be a control freak, there's no growth for the team either. Yeah. So I think, and we've done that. We very, consciously where there's no sort of set time frame that you have to spend a year at this level, you have to spend 2 years at this level. Or if you are showing capability, if you're deserving, you will get that promotion, you will get that position in our restaurants. And I think people have seen that over the years. Our head chef started as a butcher, in our restaurant. And today he's worked his way up, and not today, I mean, I would say 5 years ago, he became head chef of the table.
Yeah.
So if the opportunity is there and if you deliver, you will benefit from that opportunity. So I think that is something that, and we're not doing it to prove a point. It's because that's how this business, will succeed. And so I think that's very important. There's also a lot of transparency because, for example, when COVID happened and we were obviously completely sort of clueless about what was going to happen, how things were going to play out, we were very honest with our team the entire way. It wasn't that, it's on a need to know basis. We did like virtual town halls and were very open about what the situation was every step of the way. We didn't let go of people, which I think was also, and we were only able to do that because of our bakery business, because bakeries were considered essential services at the time. So we quickly got our bakery reopened 10 days into COVID. And again, amazing. I was there sort of morning to afternoon packing boxes and, because not everyone could come back to work.
Right.
And I mean, I remember those days. It was crazy. But that business, which then skyrocketed because it was one of the few bakeries that was open, it actually sustained our entire company, even though like pre-COVID, it was like a speck, in terms of our top line. So, I mean, going back to your point of how you hold on to a team, of course, there's attrition. Of course, people move on for better opportunities. And at the same time, if you leave on good terms, we are more than encouraging. I had someone who, he had moved to London. One of our restaurant managers had moved to London for, better prospects and fully encouraged him to go. And while, he went on with one job, but he wasn't sort of happy with that job. And then I actually helped him find another job in London through our
That's
network,
supportive.
right?
Yes.
And so, I know that at some point, if he comes back, he may consider coming back to us. And we've had a lot of team members rejoin us, when either they've gone abroad and come back, or they've gone to a sort of, competing restaurant and not and realize for whatever reason that it's not what they thought it would be. So, don't burn bridges, and that applies to any industry. And and I think just be as open and honest with your team, and they respect that. And of course, basic things like paying market wages and things is
Of
important.
course, that is given.
Yeah.
That of course is
Yeah.
given. So interesting, because you learnt everything hands-on, right? You didn't come from the industry. So Gauri, did you and Fajay and you, because not being restaurateur by design initially when you started the table, and so your insights and the way you would have liked people, did that culture, did some of those, so what did you bring in? Because you didn't come from the industry.
I think that
you learned
is
everything at the table.
That
right?
is literally, I think, what I put our success down to. I mean, one of the very important things that we didn't have an F&B background, because we literally came to it as consumers, as diners. So it was, what do we miss when, I'll give you a small example. One of my pet peeves when I go to a restaurant is if I've pored over a wine list for 5 minutes and I finally selected something, then I'm told when I'm placing the order that it's not available,
God,
right?
yeah.
It's
That's
so annoying. So
frustrating. It's very annoying.
you show off with 100 plus listing, and then most of it's not available, right? That is a poor start to a meal.
Absolutely.
And something simple like that was something that we dealt with by printing our menus every day. Now people might say, oh, that's not sustainable, that's not, but at that time we really felt like this is, yes, if one or two things aren't there, it can be verbally communicated, but if for whatever reason a lot of things aren't there, just reprint the menu. Don't start the meal on a note saying, here's a menu, but just to let you know, tuck is not there, right?
So nice, yeah, I agree with you, because it's so important. It's small, but it's important.
Exactly.
Because I carry that. I'm telling you, I went to a restaurant and and you don't know what the guests are coming for. We were celebrating my husband's birthday. It was a newly opened, nice this thing. The 3-4 items not there. Then I said, "Tala hai kya? Lock laga do," because this is not how you want to, you don't know that what I've come for, and you don't have things, and don't keep it there.
Yeah,
you're right, absolutely. It's very frustrating. So also,
and the same thing with the food. Our first chef was also from San Francisco, and people thought that's crazy. Hotels, I can understand bringing an expat chef and making that kind of investment because they don't come cheap. But a standalone restaurant, sort of, newbie to the industry doing that was crazy to people. And it paid off, right? It's not a thing of, again, it was that idea of not cutting corners and not saying, okay, I'll just send someone for 2 weeks to California, go do some market research and then come back and reproduce that, because it's not that simple. Sure. And I think that those things actually really helped us in not having the baggage of what you should be doing and following. Because some of those things that you learn actually in culinary school or I would say hotel management school sometimes are a little out of date, right? Yeah. So it needs to come from a place of confidence and your gut more than... Yeah. But I should be doing this or I should be doing that.
No, that's interesting. So Gauri, you guys have not expanded. Is this a conscious choice of, because now 15 years you've opened various formats. Now you out there, you understand. You're part of your hospitality, the national, whatever you'll call it, your
restaurant association.
Association. You're part out there. But what is it that is stopping you for not expanding further in India, not taking the investors' money? How do you manage to still say no?
It's very easy to say no, honestly, because I think it would be difficult for me to be answerable to someone else, firstly. And a lot of the decisions we've taken, not just with the table, but even since then, are probably decisions that wouldn't make sense to the average sort of restaurateur. And it's worked for us. So a lot of times investors may not understand that. We did have a restaurant that we opened where we had raised a friends and family round for that specific restaurant. And,
that was that
Misty,
Colaba.
yes. Yeah, it was a Southeast Asian concept. Yeah. And they're all still friends and family, and it's, they all sort of were great. I couldn't have asked for better sort of partners in the business. But I know that in the process of doing that, we took decisions out of a self-imposed pressure because we felt accountable to, other people.
Sure.
That I think may have impacted the reason the restaurant didn't, work. We closed it 15 months after opening. And I think that was a learning for us that the way we operate, whether that's good or bad, doesn't work when we need to sort of explain ourselves to other people. So
sure.
I think that's the reason, to answer your question, why we haven't taken on investors. But when it comes to scale, as I mentioned, this is a people business. You can't just, you can't just create replicas of your talent that easily. And talent is hard to come by, especially with this industry growing at the pace that it is. So, this is not just about outpaying the next restaurant and taking their team. It's, it has to be financially viable. And we aren't in any kind of hurry to scale, and getting the product right, the experience right, is so critical to us.
So is there a daily ritual or habit you have kept across all 15 years of running this business?
I can't think of any sort of ritual like that, but I know that I don't think there's a day that in the last 15 years that I've not looked forward to going to work. And I think that is, even if it's not a conscious thing, I think that is so important. The minute I'm sort of feeling lazy about going to work, or I'm, losing interest in it, I think that's going to be the death knell of this business.
So what's work for you? Going to work is your office, or is there something that you enter the kitchen first or look at the...
No, I'm not a chef. I don't enter any kitchens unless I absolutely have to. But no, I go to the office, but I also go, to the outlet if needed. But yeah, it's usually to our office because there's so much behind the business, right? Everyone thinks it's all, you go and hang out in your restaurants and you're eating there every day, and that's what running this restaurant is all about. It's not that.
It's not that. So of course, you being an accountant, CA, all of that, so you are, I'm sure, the head finance also. And how do you all balance? I'm sure the classic question, husband and wife, because you all married literally into it, right?
We got married 3 weeks before we opened the table.
This is like, wow. And restaurant is not an easy business because when people have holidays, you all are working.
Yeah.
Nights, weekends, you all are working. It's late night business. So managing a marriage and this and learning at the same time, like, how did you do it?
I don't know. We're still figuring it out. Trust me.
Is there a magic?
It's, the good thing is that you're working with someone you trust sort of, 100%. And I think that having that trusted business partner is the most critical thing in any business, I'm, assuming. But in this, it helps as well that, we know why we're sort of out late, or we're, sort of working from, at home, even after we've sort of ended the day, supposedly. So we know what we're both doing, and, why sometimes it's crazy hours.
But how do you then manage it at home? Is because the table is continuous.
It's tough. It's really tough. And, even that? Honestly at work to keep the sort of the personal boundaries and professional boundaries at work is as important as doing that at home. And I think what we realized very early on is that we need to sort of kind of divide the roles and responsibilities between us. Okay. And while we obviously are constantly bouncing things off each other and, taking input from each other, certain things are my sort of department, and the end sort of call is with me, and certain things
So
are
what do
Jay's.
you look at? And
I mean, of course, everything finance related,
finance.
and HR again. People we both look at. Marketing and PR is something I do entirely. Events tends to again come under me. Jay works a lot with the chefs on the menu. He works a lot on the back end when it comes to like licensing and dealing with a lot of that.
That is true.
So I mean, there's hundreds of things that have to be done, and we figured out what is his department, mine. And so I think firstly drawing those boundaries makes you kind of explains why we're still married 15, 16 years later. But at home it is tough. And sometimes he puts his foot down, I put my foot down, where I'm like, please don't talk about work till 10 a.m.
True. Gauri, now you're also at like you said, the Restaurant Association, and it's still a very strongly male-dominated business. And I am talking from my corporate experience that women in a male-dominating, it takes a lot. So do you see the same kind of, sort of a friction, a women restaurateur in a male-dominated?
It's funny, my entry into the managing committee of the NRAI was because I was a woman. So they said, listen, we now need to have a woman in the committee. Like, will you come on board? And for about 30 seconds, I was offended. And then I was like, yeah, fine. Whatever got me a seat at the table, it's fine. But the fact is, yes, you're right. It is very male dominated. Having said that, I think there are a lot more women in the profession now, whether it's as restaurateurs or as chefs. And, that balance is slowly sort of shifting.
Okay.
But I do see that a lot of women are very reluctant to put themselves out there. So
it may because in hospitality you always had, right, in the front desk and all, but really as owners, as chefs, as
founders, to put yourself out there, take those platforms that are available to us today, is something that I'm surprised I still have to like kind of convince women sometimes to come and speak on panels or to come and like, give a talk or whatever. It's like, no, I can't, what will I say? And like, how can I kind of, it is, yes, it might be nerve-wracking in the beginning, but I think you have to put yourself out there. Absolutely. You have to do this for your business. You have to do this for yourself. You have to do this for others to see that, it's possible to do this. And that's one thing that, I hope changes over time, because there are definitely more women getting into the industry. So it's only gonna, it's only headed in the right direction.
Gauri, talking about failures, like you said, Miss T was something that you all went ahead, it didn't work. Now, tell me, but how do you finally, because a lot of people, especially in restaurant, I've seen people, and like you said, the cost today is even much higher. You have to get it right first time. That failure and, the resilience to again come back and say, it's okay, I will change and start again. What happened to you guys back then?
Yeah, I mean, it was actually a very interesting lesson for me, because I really thought that, oh my God, everyone's going to think we were a one-hit wonder, right? Because it was our first restaurant that we did after the table. And, that was my personal sort of, it was like, log kya kahenge kind of thing.
Yeah, the society.
But then I also realized very quickly that actually nobody cares. It's in my head. And I'm not the first one to kind of have made a mistake in the business. And this happens in people's lives all the time. And everyone moves on. So it's really about how you approach it. And then I think it was a very sort of pivotal time for me, because I realized that I'm not defined by this business, and this is okay. It's like, okay, something didn't work out. You're not always going to have everything being 100% hit rate. Yeah. And you have to learn how to deal with that. And I think it's a really great but expensive lesson that happened for us, because you take it in your stride. And then when things happen, as you sort of progress in the years of running a business, things will happen. You will have challenges. You will have, things that don't go your way. And you just get better at, taking that in your stride, dealing with it. And
you made an interesting point that you detach your identity to that business of yours, right? So it's not you who's failed.
Exactly.
It's a business that is
Exactly.
failed, and there's learning in that, right?
And I think
so it's not your personal failure that you start,
it's not
grinding
about
on.
you exactly. It's not a reflection of you personally. I think yes, you may have made those choices and decisions, but what became sort of, I think, almost fun for us in a way was that, okay, we messed up here. All the stuff that we've learned from, this sort of the things that didn't work out, I now want to do something where I can make those corrections, right? I can put those learnings into, I mean, there's no point just like having those lessons and then not being able to do anything with it, right? So, we pivoted to a Cantonese concept, which took us about 4 months to put into action. And I remember we opened on the 7th of March, 2020 and closed it on the 17th of March, 2020.
Wow.
So that concept that restaurant saw the light of day for about 10 days. COVID happened.
Yeah.
And you're like, this can't be real, right? But again, it was, it is what it is.
Where I want to double down, and this is exactly because in spite of one success and two back to back, because one was environment, COVID happened, and obviously it was not in your hand, but too much of, because it's capex heavy, right? We spoke, and a lot of money going in. So again, to have the gumption and pick yourself back again and saying, okay, I will still do a Max Street. So what is that mindset? Like, I
think both things happened in different ways, right? So closing Misty was a decision that we took, and took ownership of that decision and worked on a new concept. Closing May 13, which is the Cantonese concept, was out of our hands. It was, due to external factors. And we also didn't know that it was like finished, right? Because we assumed a couple of weeks, hopefully those chefs can come back, etc. Of course, that didn't happen. But we put in a lot of money into the space, into, the menu development, all of that. And our landlord was great with us. He, worked with us to give us that little bit of breathing room, even though restaurants were allowed to reopen in November 2020. We were not, we couldn't open because our chefs were expat chefs from Singapore and Malaysia. They had gone back and they were not, obviously, they were not able to come back. So we just didn't know what to do. And at some point, he worked with us to be able to reopen this. And in the meantime, what had happened in that year of, the first year of COVID was that we'd created delivery concepts that, were sort of the bread and butter of the restaurant, of our business at that time. And we were like, okay, look, we've got the space. It was good as new and ready to, open as a restaurant. We would have to make a few changes to, make it ready for a sort of slightly different menu. But let's put these delivery brands into this restaurant.
Okay.
Let's take some of the old table dishes that will never come back on the table menu.
Nice.
And let's just see, what have we got to lose? I mean, we're literally at rock bottom. It was a last ditch effort. And that's why this menu at Max Street has a bit of Asian, because it's got some of the old Misty and May 13 dishes. It's got pizzas because we had started a delivery brand called Max Street Toppings during COVID. Okay. It has our bakery because our bakery obviously was doing well. And then it's got, actually, for those, who really know table, it's got some like very old table dishes on the menu as well. And that's literally how Max Street happened. We like literally put everything into the kitchen sink and gave it one last shot, and it took off. Like it was just like and I think it took off because it's got this whole mix of cuisines, which actually Indians love. They love choice. They love multi-cuisine. And as much as we sort of turn our nose up at multi-cuisine, it's what your consumer wants.
Yeah.
So it worked.
Awesome, I think so. Yes, you got the whole jamboree in. So talk me about the new thing that you're trying, right?
This last year has been pretty crazy. I think we've opened a lot more than we anticipated. So in November last year, we opened Casper's, which is our restaurant in Bandra, and it's like a sort of European neighborhood bistro space,
Nice.
very small space that we had, and we were trying to figure out what to do. And everyone's like, "Why did you open a new brand now?
Yeah,
why
absolutely.
didn't you just
I
scale
was
up?"
going to ask you the same thing. Yeah.
I mean, sometimes
Bring
the
the table
space.
to the suburbs.
I think I'll die if I have to do another table anywhere. But I think sometimes the space dictates what you can do in there. So, this was, and, going back to that thing of it, everything we've done is really something that we feel excited by. I mean, scale makes sense from a business perspective, of course. Why keep reinventing the wheel? Like, just sort of work with what you have. That, of course, is one way to go. But I think every so often we have this little kira to do something new, and it's it's worked. So that's about 6 months old. And then in February this year, we launched a brand called Loudmouth. So Jay's oldest daughter joined our business a year ago and has brought, a fresh lease of life into the company, and a fresh perspective, a younger perspective. And, while the product can be enjoyed by all ages, I think the branding and the sort of communication around Loudmouth is very much targeting a younger audience.
Very Gen Z, very
Yeah,
nice. So now we have the next generation bringing in the
and I don't think we did it consciously, but I think as we've turned 15 in January this year, it's so important to continue to be relevant, right? And to keep keep sort of inducting a new audience into your business.
Yes.
And you can't do that if you just stay static with what you've been doing. There has to be that dynamism in what you bring in, whether it's on the brand, like products that you're doing, whether it's the way you communicate. And it's not easy for someone, I feel like very old now saying this, but it's not easy for me, for example, to think in that, with that
for the Loudmouth
for that age group, right?
Yeah.
You might see stuff, but I don't have my pulse on I don't have a pulse on that mindset and what they want as much as someone that age does. So it's been great having Alia on the team, because she resonates with that sort of age group, obviously, much better than Jay or I do.
And I really love what you're saying, because I think that is what people are going to listen to this podcast with Gauri should remember, that consistency and product right before rushing to scale and wanting to make that money, because then anyways you're going to lose the game if you don't have it.
There is there's this view of this industry getting funded by private equity and VC, and there's so much money going into restaurant businesses and things, and so there's this kind of urgency to like bring in funding and scale, and I have not in the premium space seen it actually bear out successfully in too many brands in India. And so, I think that it's very easy to get caught in that whirlwind of wanting funding, but, product is not that easy to get right.
Yeah, and it's coming from somebody who's done it consistently over the years. Then one thing I'm going to ask you, and it's my own curiosity also, this space is also bringing a lot of celebrity-first restaurants like Shilpa Shetty and Malaika Arora, or Gauri Khan and Karan Johar. But do you really see that sustaining? And you guys have avoided, right? You've not had a celebrity partner, so... any reason?
No, I think that there's a huge draw, obviously, that celebrities have.
Name and face, really.
Yeah, and I think that like it's a great marketing tool, and it again, like I said, it brings people in the door, because whether they think they're going to see celebrities or they hear about a restaurant because it's associated with someone famous who's amplifying it, it gets people in the door, and that it's marketing, right? At the end of the day. But again, once people come in
The
to bring
repeat.
them back in,
Yeah.
the product has to work. They're not going to keep coming because it's
Correct.
associated with a celebrity.
Yeah.
So I think as long as that aspect is recognized as to what the value they're bringing and why you're using a celebrity partner in your business, then you can see this as a long-term win. You know what? Today, with no matter how much paid PR, how much whatever digital, sort of equity you have, all of that, the only thing that works is word of mouth. I say this like I will bet my bottom dollar on this that nothing works like word of mouth, because these are people who have paid and are then endorsing your brand versus someone who is paid to do it.
Correct.
And that money can't buy.
That money can't buy. No, absolutely. That your product has to then finally speak for itself. Talking about the future of this industry with the whole AI and a lot of things happening today with Gen AI and humanoid. So today in many countries that I travel, you see the serving or the humanoid or the robot coming and doing it. So do you see that happening here? And I mean, are you guys looking at that?
Look, there's
Investing.
so much happening in the AI space and tech developments. I think for us, you can't not be incorporating it into your business in some shape or form, whether
True.
it's data analytics, whether it's more efficient processes, systems. There
Enabling your whole process
I mean, there are businesses where it is, like I said, things that are very SOP driven can be mechanized using, automated kitchen systems. We, in our business, don't necessarily see that happening yet. But it's inevitable, right? It's going to go in that direction. I think it's just a matter of what the business specifically is. For example, we never went down that route of QR codes for menus because, to me, something as simple as that, right? And it's okay in a certain sort of type of restaurant, but like in ours, no. If you're okay to come out, then you're okay to hold a paper menu,
Absolutely.
right? So I think it's not one size fits all. It really depends on which sort of what your service offering is, what your experience is, and but of course you have to be incorporating tech into your business. If you're not, then you're going to be falling behind very quickly.
So if you had not started this, would you today choose to be a restaurateur? Oh,
If I didn't know anything about the business, no, I'd probably still try to talk my husband out of it.
if you had to do something today, Gauri,
It's every day we're like, can someone just please buy us out and like and sort of save us from ourselves?
I hope someone's listening.
Yeah, I hope so too. I'm open.
Yeah.
But at the same time, when you have an idea and you see an opportunity, we keep saying this is the last restaurant we're doing. This is the last, no more sort of new brands. And but at the same time, this city, this country is so ripe for opportunities and ideas, and you
Indians
can't
love
help
food.
yourself. Yeah, and you
Yeah.
can't. There's still so much to be done here. You think, there's already like, it's such a saturated market and industry, but there's still so much opportunity. And, I think we just innately can't help ourselves. So we literally like, we're like, no more restaurants. And then some broker will call and be like, so I have this fabulous space. And then we're like, chal, let's go see it. So
Who gives in? You give in or Jay gives in? Is it?
oh please, he gives in. Like I'm constantly like yelling at him for even taking their calls. But it's very hard to say no when you see an opportunity. And I think that comes with being an entrepreneur in general.
Yeah.
You can't help yourselves, but at the same time, you can't be foolish to just keep sort of expanding without getting your sort of foundation really
right.
solid. And
I think that advantage you guys have because you brought in that CA finance background. What would you tell all these, the young today who are very excited? They understand maybe the food well, they're passionate on creating food well, but not so my sister she's a chef and she's in Dubai, of course, and there the norms are tough, and she wanted to start this since a while, and I always say, but you don't understand the finance of it, because what goes in the whole ingredients, how do you measure? I mean, and none of us understand that. So you have that. So what would you advise
Oh
them?
my God. I did the post on this recently because I was busy doing some accounts till like late into the night.
Yeah.
And I just said that, even if you're sort of like so many years into the business or whatever, having a pulse on the numbers is just
Absolutely.
critical, and of course I have an advantage with a background in accounts, but I would say this to anybody wanting to get into the business, and it's usually the creative people, right, who want to
Yes.
get into the business.
Mostly creative. in this, yes.
That's a great way in, but it's also the easiest way out, because if you don't have a pulse on the business, no matter how creative you are and great you are at sort of making a product, it's not gonna last very long, right?
True.
If you don't understand your numbers. And of course, it's very normal to outsource that responsibility to people who specialize in this, but don't do it so blindly where you don't know the questions to ask and you
True.
don't know things for yourself, because nobody's going to care about the business as much as you do. Even for us, when we closed Misty, it was because we had to sort of, it's very easy to be emotional about things and be like, it's my baby. And I'm, I think in this industry, we're eternal optimists, right? We live in hope. We do everything in hope. And, you're just like, I'll give it one more month. I'll just give it one more month. And, you're bleeding, and you have to know when to cut your losses. And that requires you to have that business side of things as well.
Awesome, Gauri. And on that note, I'm going to quickly turn into a rapid fire, more fun, but it was amazing conversation with you. So you've gone a lot now into, digital media. You have a lot of followers. You yourself are now a lot into it from the era that you started. There was nothing like this. And you become almost like a content creator yourself, right? So word of mouth or Instagram, which channel you prefer? I know you just answered.
Word of mouth.
Word of mouth. You still feel that? Yeah. Pick one in the next 12 months, a 10th restaurant in Mumbai, or would you look at first outside the city?
No, I think Mumbai.
Still Mumbai. Yeah, I think. Finish the sentence honestly. The real reason I never took outside money is...
I don't want to be answerable to anybody else.
I don't want to. I'm my own boss. Who apologizes first? Usually you or Jay?
Jay.
Jay does. Auditor or restaurateur if you had to choose one?
Restaurateur.
Wow. So that shift has now really...
I mean, now it's been like longer as a restaurateur than
the
accountant. Yeah.
What does it take to be the best?
Consistency.
Would you tell to my audience that what winning mindset means to you?
I think just, staying true to your vision. Firstly, having a vision that you actually believe in, and not because it's worked for somebody else.
That's amazing, yeah.
And staying true to that, but also having the humility to sort of evolve it as time goes along. And, being open to feedback, but not changing your course every 5 minutes. And really sort of recognizing that there will be challenging times, but sort of sticking through it and not giving up easily.
Amazing. So the night you found out that table was number 1 in the country, what was the feeling?
Oh my God. I still remember that. It was just crazy. I think I was crying. I'd also lost my voice. I almost didn't actually go to those awards because I was very, very sick right up until that afternoon. And then Jay said, just, pump some pills and just come for like half an hour and show your face and then leave. And I think, just being around friends in the industry and all of that, I ended up being there. And I think I would have killed myself if I'd missed that moment. But it was just a pinch me moment to, to have that kind of endorsement 14 years into the business. And I'm so grateful that it happened. And we had the whole team around. So it was an amazing feeling.
Yeah, more power to you. And
thank you.
If we take away restaurants away from you and your, Big Four career and all, who really Gauri is?
I think I'm just a mom to a 13-year-old and just, someone who enjoys life. I love the outdoors. I love being in a sort of farm in Alibag. I love traveling. And that's me. I love eating. I think I will never, ever let go of that.
The eating. So, Gauri, in 15 years of running this, was there a moment you genuinely considered walking away from it all?
Yeah, lots of them still happens. I mean, obviously, like COVID was a big one for us, where as things were getting more and more delayed. But at the same time, it was strange because we were like, okay, let's pivot, let's get into delivery. We started doing deliveries to Alibag, which wasn't happening, and so many people had moved there right during that time. I don't know. I think, you have bad days. Look, it's normal, right? For anyone in anything.
Absolutely.
But like I said, as entrepreneurs, you're also these eternal optimists, and you think very, it's not jugaad, but you think like, you learn to pivot when needed. And that's so important as, in this business, but any business, is being nimble on your feet and being able to like find opportunity. So, you have those down days, but I think when you're true to yourself, you can't actually stay away from it.
So what is one thing in your restaurant you would never let a machine do?
Speak to a guest.
Speak to a guest. You still feel it's more human. You need the FaceTime. And what excites you most about the future of hospitality?
I think the universe is so huge, and the potential for doing, bringing new ideas to India is just immense, and I'm very excited. I think this is the time to be in F&B. It's also a great time to be in India. India is having its moment.
Yeah, true.
And I'm really sort of amazed and thrilled to see what's happening with regional food having its moment right now, and becoming mainstream. And I'm amazed to see that, and very excited to see what kind of happens in the years to come.
So on that note, thank you very much for being on my show.
Thank
Really
you so
enjoyed it.
much.
Yeah.